everyone. I think we started our program tonight. As a moderator of this forum, I want to thank you for your participation to make this event possible and exchange viewpoints on the theme of the impact of post-COVID-19 on globalization, economy, trade, development, and democratic freedom. First, I would like to introduce His Honest Excellency Yao Yingqi, the President of WLFD. Zheng Yongquan, she's not here right now, not on the picture. And Seguro and Judy Seguro and Miss Janet Yang Ro is not presenting themselves, but they provide us with recorded message. Later we'll let you listen to them. Member Illinois House of Representatives, Bruce Knott on the line right now, Director of Unitarian Universalist at UN, Honorable Jeffrey Hafans, Senior Advisor, Coalition of United Nations, We Need and Together First, Honorable Hulegi Robert, President WLFD Mexico Chapter, and Dr. Linji Jiang from Ministry of National Development Council of ROC, Dr. Pazzato, Ambassador of Sovereign Order Malta to the Republic of Nauru. And the last one is Honorable Philip Yin, Member WLFD International Development Committee, Justice of the Peace Commissioner of Supreme Court, Belize. As you will know, after the Level 3 alert of COVID-19 was applied to nationwide on May 19 by Central Epidemic Command Center, so-called CECC of Taiwan, indoor gatherings over 4 people are prohibited. However, it at least takes 10 or so technicians to set up the video and audio equipment. The alert was first issued on May 15 and continuously extended until July 26. That is the reason for this forum extended to June 10 and then again to July 8. In line with the CECC partial easing of the COVID-19 legal curbs issued on July 27, the forum finally made possible set on August 8 and a rehearsal 1 day earlier. We apologize for all the inconvenience. The impacts of pandemic were comprehensive. First, vaccine inequality. The rapid development of COVID-19 achieved at a record speed and financed by massive public and private funding in the United States, the European Union, Britain, as well as China, signifies a great triumph of epidemic. Government partner with pharmaceutical companies, pouring in billions of money to procure raw materials, finance clinic trial, and retrofit factories. And the most important, billion or more billion dollars were committed to buy the finished product. However, this country's success has created stock inequity. People of the affluent and middle-income countries have received about more than 90% numerous vaccines delivered so far. Many of the rest will have to wait for a long time. And for months, these countries have blocked a proposal at the World Trade Organization that would waive intellectual property rights for the vaccines and treatments, but bogged down. Though the COVAX, the Global Vaccine Alliance, aimed to vaccinate the world's poorest country and faced a more than $2 billion shortfall to accomplish that. Second, ensure future in global economy. Substantial job growth could still take longer time. Prospects remain grim for the meaningful recovery before middle of the next year. The concept of normalcy seems an open question. Long-term damage would add to the inequality. People with high education and advanced skill harvested the waning of expansion with other struggle, and the industry faces great challenges are lower skilled workers. It is unsure a so-called economic V-shaped recovery will resuscitate. In front of us, easy as an on-off switch. The calamities from the failed business and elevated joblessness likely to continue with an uncertain period. Third, challenging for democracy after COVID-19, Celia Berlin and Giovanna Di Mario, two visiting researchers of the Brookings Institute, noted in 2020, the year of the coronavirus, disrupt people's life and disseminate a sense of uncertainty and vulnerability comparable only to the time of the war in terms of infected and death toll. Political leaders around the world confronted the challenge of acting quickly in confused scientific uncertainty, leading them to impose lockdown measures, limiting personal freedom and participation, and personal civil liberties such as freedom of movement, freedom of enterprise, and freedom of assembly have been severely restricted. Democratic way of life has been curtailed. Furthermore, the rise of the populist and nationalist movement in developed and developing countries create another severe challenge to democracy and freedom. People even ask democracy or authoritarianism is the best regime against coronavirus. Fourth, the last, impact on democracy around the world. The rapid global spread of the COVID-19 has exhibited that no matter how effective a country is at fighting against this epidemic domestically, this threat will not stop until all the countries fighting it together around the world. Thank you very much. And now, following me, I would, and the President Yao would like to give his remarks. Mr. Yao, please.
世盟中华民国总会真理事长，一神普救派驻联合国办公室纳兹先生，我们需要的联合国联盟侯范斯先生，加拿大国会议员史格罗女士，美国伊利诺州州议会众议员杨启华女士，世盟拉美区域组织主席、墨西哥分会会长郝瑞奇前大法官，意大利马耳他骑士团驻勒卢共和国大使杜云士先生，中华民国前国发会主委林旭祖嘉先生，世盟海外发展委员邢增辉先生，各位贵宾、各位先生、女士，大家好。
Everybody, good morning. Honorable Zheng Yongchuan, Honorable Bruce Knott, Honorable Jeffrey Hafans, Honorable Judith Skrull, Honorable Jen Yang Ro, Honorable Hariki Robos, Honorable Fabrizio Bozzato, Dr. Lin Chu Jia, Philip Yang. Good morning, or good morning, everyone.
非常欢迎大家拨冗前来参加这次由世盟总会及世盟中华民国总会联合主办的国际自由民主视讯论坛。由于新冠肺炎疫情发展至今，已造成二战以来全球最大规模的伤害，不但各国人民受到感染，以致生命健康受到威胁者，共计有1.95亿多万人 死亡人数也达到418万人之多。尤其是变种病毒不断的产生与扩散，至今仍无法受到有效的抑制，实在令人担忧。过去我们所认为发达的欧美各国，全在这次疫情中跌了一大跤，同时各国经贸旅游的停滞与损失，工商企业的停顿，各种比赛集会的停摆，各种文艺活动的暂停，人与人之间实体交流的禁止，也造成了各国家社会的混乱与恐惧。世盟为了能在此疫情中对一般民众提供若干协助，特召开这次视讯会议，订定主题为后新冠肺炎疫情对全球化之冲击、经贸发展与自由民主。除了持续探讨新冠肺炎疫情对自由民主及人权的影响外，要特别着重在影响人民生计的生意往来与经贸金融发展，更特别着重在影响人民生计的生意往来与经贸金融发展。今天对于各位贵宾及各位朋友的踊跃参与会谈，本人要再度的表示诚挚的欢迎和感谢之意。
Welcome to the 2021 WLFD International Video Forum on Freedom and Democracy, co-sponsored by WLFD Headquarters and WLFD ROC Chapter. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and made a wreak havoc damage to the whole world since the end of World War II, resulting the total confirmed case over 198 million, with a total death toll roughly over 4 million and 227,000. Because the variant strain of the virus are still developing and spreading quickly, which annoy us very much, the pandemic seems not going easily controlled. Meanwhile, damage of decreased business activity and staff traveling, gaming, meeting, cultural activity, and social activities bring about the chaos and panic in any country of the world. In order to help people like you and me in the pandemic, WLFD has decided to hold a video forum. Not only the pandemic influence on freedom and democracy, but also global economy, trade, finance that affect people in general. I deeply appreciate your participation and discussion that will help provide a possible solution. I sincerely welcome you all again.
世盟自1993年起，即成为联合国 NGO 的正式成员，肩负协助推动联合国宪章之重责大任，并同时也要推动世盟本身宗旨，也即是提倡自由与民主，反对国际恐怖主义、帝国主义、极权主义与威权主义，全面支持自由民主及世界和平理念，并担任经济发展与 教育文化交流的国际合作协调中心，以促进社会进步与生活水准的提升。眼看今日的疫情发展已经严重到不能自扫门前雪的地步，我们也要提出呼吁，请英美德法祖国站出来，勇于承担强而有力的国际领导者角色，避免陷入领导真空，慷慨提出国际公共财，促使国际经济体系顺利运行，尽速恢复全球繁荣安定局面。同时，世盟也将秉持世盟宗旨，督促世盟各国峰会，全力协助各国政府与人民共同打拼防疫，让大家在疫情肆虐下活得更有希望、更有意义。本人确信，各位与谈人学养丰富、历练老道，一定可以在此次会议中提出高瞻远瞩的见解与建议，协助大家共度难关。
Since 1993, the WLFD has become a member of the UNDP DPI NGO. Its objectives are abided by the United Nations charters and to continue to make efforts to advocate and support the principle of the cause of freedom, democracy, and world peace, oppose international terrorism, imperialism, totalitarianism, and authoritarianism, and to be a coordination center for international cooperation in economic development, education, and cultural exchange, in order for the offer to social progress and a better standard of life. Year 2021 COVID-19 pandemic has made such a critical situation, as the United States of America, United Kingdom, Germany, France should stand out briefly to play a leader role to guide us to tackle the problem efficiently. Furthermore, they also should provide the vaccines as international public good and take its action to restore the global prosperity. Only through global cooperation, life under the pandemic threat will become more hopeful and meaningful. I believe you will provide us with measures, enough insight, and the suggestion to help, which can help us to get over the difficulties.
最后，再次谢谢大家拨冗参加会议，敬祝大家身体健康，万事如意。本次会议顺利圆满成功，谢谢。
Finally, thanks you again for taking your time to attend the meeting, and may I wish you health, happiness, and a great success of the forum. Thank you very much. Following that, the President would give us some remarks.
老总会长，各位贵宾，大家好。
President Rao, distinguished guests, dear, and all the panelists, everybody, how are you, everybody? Wish you good.
世界自由民主联盟1993年就成为联合国非政府的组织的成员，多年来一直秉持着联合的宗旨，推动相关的 NGO 的活动。世盟成立67年来，基于维护自由、民主、人权，支持世界和平的理念为宗旨，受到世界130多个国家会员的响应，共同的将自由、民主、人权和世界和平的理念推展到全世界，一起努力，共同奋斗。
Welcome and thank you to take part in the 2021 WLFD International Video Forum on the theme of the impact of the post-COVID-19 on globalization, economic trade development, and democratic freedom. As we all understood that WLFD was set up in 1954 with the goals and objectives to hold the spirit and aim to enhance freedom, democracy, human rights, and world peace. As a result of the favorable response, 130 chapters around the world to this day has been established over the world in the past 67 years. In 1993, WLFD was formally admitted as a member of UNDPI NGO, which encouraged us to run hard through the joint efforts to promote and carry out the agenda of freedom, democracy, human rights, and world peace.
2020新冠肺炎病毒在全球肆虐，除了在许多国家造成生命和健康的严重影响之外，更引起社会的恐慌和经济的损害。这一次世界自由民主联盟来举办视讯论坛，主题就是后新冠疫情对全球化的影响、经贸民主和自由民主。台湾在防疫的前半期是领先世界各国的，可以说是全球防疫体系的模范生。到了防疫的下半场，今年的5月，台湾爆发了本土疫情，全国提升在第3级的警戒，民众生活和经济的一个活动受到严重的影响。由于全球疫情能够快速的扩散，各国政府都来举办纾困和振兴产业的相关措施。经济复苏的快慢取决于疫苗未来的普及率，所以我们一直主张疫苗是全民的公共财，各国不论是其经济能力，都要公平取得疫苗，让疫苗能够普遍的来施打，而且很快迅速的得到疫情的控制。
In the year of 2020, COVID-19 created such a wreak havoc on health, human beings, social panic, and economic damages. Today's forum would like to focus on the theme about the tremendous future impacts. Our country took a lead in the first half and successfully playing as a model to obstruct the outbreak of the pandemic. However, in the middle part of May 2021, domestic case epidemic break out. Our government immediately upgraded to level 3 alert in order to confine the spread of COVID-19 and created a strong impact on economic activities and people's daily life. Accordingly, governments in countries around the world took the different relief package to treat the health crisis and build out the economy. However, its velocity depends on the vaccination. This is why we reiterate the vaccination and treatment medicine should be work as a public good, not let it be decided by the market economy. Each country, no matter of their economic capability, should have the equal opportunity to acquire the vaccine. The more prevalent the vaccination, the easier the pandemic control.
新冠肺炎疫情对全世界已经造成重大的伤害。疫情爆发后，各国采取必要的措施，直接的或间接的都影响到了基本人权。譬如一，以防疫为由，对基本人权做出了限制；二，在防疫的过程中，以防疫为由扩大的行政裁量权，压缩了立法的监督权；三，防疫过程中控管执政当局有负面影响的讯息。
In time of COVID-19 pandemic, all the governments adopted epidemic prevention measures, including lockdown cities, home isolation, etc., would create direct or indirect impact on people's freedom and human rights, expand administration discretion, and narrow down supervisory power of the legislative bodies, and keep supervision on negative message against the ruling authorities.
展望未来，防疫疫情发展过往与往不同了。除了消了防疫的措施之后，边界人员的移动和开放观光的措施即将逐渐的复苏，但仍然需要一段长时间才能够完全达到目标。各国经济活动将在疫情和缓之后重新开启。然而，为了因应未来的挑战，社会的创新能力和适应力是相对重要的。台湾人民在疫情期间所展现的高度自制力和适应力，让疫情能够减少到最低的损害。台湾要继续坚持普世价值、自由、民主、人权，在经济上要持续的发展全面贸易的伙伴关系，让经济早日复苏。
What are the experiences of post-COVID-19? Economic and trade development are quite different from the previous ones. After lifting restriction of epidemic prevention, cross-border travelers are expected to resurgent, and international economic activities will gradually follow the step back to normal again. However, adaptability and self-discipline are the most important concerns. First, will self-discipline and adaptability will help minimize the influence of the pandemic. To accept the challenge, people and government of Taiwan will double their efforts, continue to fight hard for universal value of freedom, democracy, and human rights, and build a constructive global business partners relationship to resuscitate the economy. Thank you. Now would I like to invite the pre-recorded message from the Member House of Commons, Canada, Scroll.
Greetings, my name is Judy Scroll. I'm a member of Parliament here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Thank you for the invitation to this year's International Video Forum on Freedom and Democracy, something I have participated on for many years. I hope the event is an engaging and informative summit on the impacts of globalization, especially in the post-COVID-19 world. I want to thank the Honorable David Liu on moderating today's agenda and all the hard work, staff, and everyone who's affiliated with the WLFD who put forth all of the work to make this special event happen. As the chair of the Canada-Taiwan Parliamentary Friendship Group, I have seen firsthand the benefits of positive unilateral agreements between Canada and Taiwan. And as we share priorities in trade, commerce, the relationship with Canada and Taiwan has never been more agreeable. And as a longtime defender of human rights, along with many of my colleagues, Canada stands with Taiwan on several issues, and we will continue working together to make the strongest relationships and friendships that are even possible. As well, all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created several socio-economic challenges for both Canada and Taiwan and many other countries. By promoting peace, dialogue, and democracy, I know we can create a better outcome for both Canada and for Taiwan. And we can continue growing our great relationship to the benefit not only of us, but our friends and allies around the world. So while the recovery from COVID-19 continues, it will not be easy, and I'm confident that our relationship between Canada and Taiwan will continue to survive and to be an example for other countries around the world. So my colleagues on the Canada-Taiwan Parliamentary Friendship Group all share the same priorities on providing the best relationship possible with Taiwan and its people, and I look forward to continuing this relationship as we have in the past in the future. I thank you all again for this invitation. I regret that we cannot get together in person, that we're having to use technology to bring us together. But I congratulate everyone involved. I wish you all well. Stay safe, and till the next time that we have a chance to get together. Thank you for the opportunity to say hello. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We treasure your friendship, and I'm glad you squeezed out your time. See you next time. Thank you very much. Now, following that, I would like Miss Honorable Janet Young Rowe.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all of you who are joining this forum on freedom and democracy. I am Representative Janet Young Rowe. I'm the state representative for Illinois' 41st District, which is a community about 30 miles west of Chicago. I'm so sorry that I'm not able to join you in person today, but I want to thank you, thank Legislator Charles Chen, and thank the World League for Freedom and Democracy for the opportunity to send my well wishes and for organizing this forum. What important topics this group will be discussing today. After the year we've all had around the world, we've had a lot of time to reflect and to think about the implications of globalization, of economic trade, and of democratic freedoms in a post-COVID world. You have an incredible range of panelists from all around the world to weigh in on these topics, and I know that the conversations you'll have today will go a long way toward deeper understanding and toward building the bridges and the connections that will help all of us move forward. I'm looking forward to hearing more from this group, and I'm looking forward to one day soon being able to be with all of you in person. In the meantime, thank you again for all the hard work our organizers have put into this event, and congratulations on what I know will be a very successful forum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Honor Janet Young Rowe, Member, Illinois House of Representatives. And following, I would like to invite Honorable Bruce Knott give his remark on this subject. Bruce, please.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm honored to once again be called to discuss, to address the World League of Freedom and Democracy, and to see my dear friends and colleagues again, even if virtually. Your work is needed now more than ever. We are going through a very tough time with all the disruption and death caused by the pandemic. As with the economic crash of 1929, when things get bad, people are tempted to turn to authoritarian leaders who always make things worse. We are seeing this again. The People's Republic of China, which has been authoritarian since its birth and has gone from deadly periods of authoritarianism to freer, more market-oriented liberal phases, and now back to frightening levels of authoritarianisms, trampling on the freedoms of the citizens of Hong Kong and of the Uyghur community and of Tibet. It is also threatening the freedom of Taiwan with ever more frightening and intimidating methods. The United States is also threatened with authoritarianism. Many of our states are passing legislation which will suppress the vote because they didn't like the results of our election in 2020, which was the best run and most secure election in our history. Trump lost by a very wide margin. So the losers want to manipulate the process to ensure future victories. We're seeing these tactics in more and more countries which maintain democratic forms, but without the independent judiciary, a free press, and free and fair elections that are needed. The list of countries which hold elections that only result in re-electing the authoritarian president or military government is growing in countries like Syria, Myanmar, Hungary, Poland, Russia, Belarus, Egypt, and more. We see authoritarian signs in India and the Philippines, Brazil, and more. There are strong authoritarian parties vying for power in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Italy, and more. The United States is struggling to preserve its democracy. We had a good election and Joe Biden won by more than 10 million votes. Unfortunately, there are millions of Americans and the former president and most of the opposition party that don't accept the result of our election. For the first time in our history, there was an insurrection in our capital incited by the former president who didn't want to accept defeat and leave office. In our long history, we've never experienced anything like this. I believe the focus of freedom and democracy I believe the forces of freedom and democracy will win in the United States, but the struggle will take time. Democratic nations in Asia and the Pacific also need to work hard to preserve their hard-won freedom and democracy. For most of my life, I've heard the phrase, freedom isn't free. For most of my life, the phrase was used to justify the United States conducting military operations in other countries. However, the greatest threat to the United States is no longer Islamic extremists. It's white supremacist terrorism. It's not just me saying that. The United States FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, has established the fact that domestic white supremacist terrorists are the greatest threat for some years now. Taiwan has remained and continues to be one of the freest nations on earth. Taiwan has had hard-fought elections and the results are respected. I hope that Taiwan maintains its freedom despite threats from abroad. As divided as the United States is, we are united in our commitment to protect Taiwanese democracy and freedom. This is not the worst time that America has ever faced. That was our Civil War in the 1860s. We survived that, but the scars linger and are painful even today. We are divided and it hurts, and it will continue hurting. But I believe that we hold together and live up to our obligations and to the people of our friends like Taiwan. So these are tough times, and nothing I can say can make them better. We need to be tough to face these tough times. We need to be smart and develop effective strategies. We need to maintain our alliances and foster freedom and democracy everywhere. The best defense a democratic, freedom and loving nation can have is a large and powerful circle of friendly nations that are also dedicated to freedom and democracy. Working together with all the intellect and ability and hard work we can muster, we can live to survive and thrive to better days to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce. I cannot agree more. I would say, yes, it is true. When things get bad, people are tempted to turn to authoritarian leaders. And even the United States also threatened with authoritarianism. More countries maintain democratic structure, but without independent judiciary, a free press, and a free and fair election. Freedom isn't free. It has been obtained through a hard, long way. Thank you very much. Now, Professor Lin Chi Chia would like to give his remarks. Oh, sorry. Should be your turn. I'm sorry. Judge, please.
Hello, dear friends. Good morning and good night for everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Mexico is a country of graveyards and crematoriums. The pandemic and the organized crime have left a death toll like a war. The National Institute of Statistics, Geography, and Informatics has calculated over 1 million deaths as the real number of deaths from COVID, despite the official data that has been presented by health authority. This places the country in 4th place in the world in terms of the number of deaths. In addition to the above, organized crime and drug cartels have found a loophole in the official security policy, a refuge for carrying out illicit activities that go unpunished. In addition to drug traffic, diverse crimes include stealing fuel, kidnapping, and extortions of the wealthiest population in some prosperous areas of the country. In effect, public security policies coined by the president's phrase, hugs and no bullets, leads to the submission of the police force to the criminal mafias fighting for the market. It is true that many homicides are committed due to the confrontation between gangs groups, but this does not mean that there are innocents in the count of fatalities found associated with this event. A recent study carried out by the head of the United States Northern Command, General Glenn Van Herk, estimated that almost a third of the national territory is in the control of different cartels. The action of the National Guard is completely insufficient to stop their actions. Although the data seems exaggerated, it is true that many citizens have knowledge of a criminal act or have close relatives who have recently disappeared or are victims who have suffered eviction from their communities and properties because the gangs occupied the land for drug plantation. In March of last year, when the first case of COVID was announced in Mexico, President Obrador did not do anything to combat the virus for the sake of his country. And actually, he viewed the pandemic as a salvation for his political interest. He believed he would not have any opposition to his public policies. After that, he has been repetitive in establishing decrees with the purpose to end what he considers the neoliberal policies of the past. The people believes in the expansion of freedom, the recognition of human rights, free trade, and a more solid and productive middle class. President Obrador believes that the neoliberal beliefs creates an unfair, unequal, and selfish society that should be dismantled. The growth of the governmental companies is a detriment to Mexico because of inferior goods and services due to decreased competition. This is an example of the chaos he is creating in the middle of this pandemic. But not satisfied with the domestic disaster, he also showed a regression in his international policy, aligning himself with the ideologies of the past. Recently, President López Obrador proposed that Cuba be declared World Heritage for being an example of resistance to the United States. Speaking in front of Latin American ambassadors in the ceremony on July 24th and commemorating a death anniversary of the South American liberator Simón Bolívar, the president made a statement defending the Cuban regime. He blamed the block imposed by the United States as the cause of the crisis the island has always endured. His speech did not address the brutal repression of the Cuban dictatorship against thousands of peaceful protesters on July 11 this year. The protesters only demanded food and medicine to face the pandemic. It was also the first time they were able to freely express their needs. It is delusional to believe that the United States embargo imposed by Washington in 1962 after the expropriation of companies with the United States capital on the island was the reason for the economic disaster our neighboring island nation is experiencing. Cuba normally trades with more than 70 countries around the world and also with the United States. In fact, after Brazil, the United States is the largest exporter of the food and agricultural products to Cuba. Not to mention that one of Cuba's main sources of income are the remittances sent month after month by citizens of the island who have mostly settled in Florida. Before the revolution, Cuba was one of the main countries in Latin America in development, according to indicators such as health, mortality, literacy, etc. But today, Cuba is in misery despite the fact that the regime increased the salaries by 5 times in the beginning of the year. The majority of Cuban workers today earn around $95 a month. However, with an estimated inflation rate of 500% this year, there is a shortage for almost everything and the products are out of reach for the islanders. In the 60s, Cuba was much more socially advanced than China and Vietnam, 2 countries that have also had socialist market economies. However, today those countries are in much better conditions in all economic, cultural, and social indicators. Therefore, the declaration of the President of Mexico, López Obrador, is truly regrettable because Cuba is an example of a dictatorship that has brought hunger, exile, and death to the country. Greater cause for concern is that these demagogic policies similar are presented in Nicaragua and Venezuela and the rest of South America, threatening to form a socialist society. For example, Peruvian President Pedro Castillo recently announced that socialism will be a fundamental factor in the army of his government. President Castillo's appointment of radical Marxist follower as head of his ministerial cabinet and his praising of the lines of action imposed by Díaz in Cuba, Ortega in Nicaragua, and Maduro in Venezuela has led the Peruvian bonds to drop in all markets and the currency to devaluate. There is nothing wrong with having new visions for the country. The problem, however, is the first thing that they do is to fight democratic institutions, electoral authorities, and courts. In addition, they want to eliminate all kinds of institutions that are harmful to their community. Since once they arrive in office, they do not intend to leave. They will likely change laws in order to stay in power, like in Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. It is serious that in this last Central American country, Nicaragua, President Daniel Ortega, in order to leave his wife, the current vice president, as his successor in the presidency, imprisoned more than 1,000 opposition politicians who contested him, despite the widespread concern of the Organization of the American States. The act this organization issued was the reason that the Mexican president wanted to ban it as an international organization, because in his opinion, it only serves the interest of North America. It is because of these claims that today, more than ever, the rescue of democratic principles and of organizations that bring together nations to defend universal interest becomes relevant. However, it must act with more sense of respect for human rights and political diplomacy and prevent undemocratic behaviors of presidents who act more like dictators. In the middle of the last century, the term globalization was coined to understand a phenomenon that had increasingly accentuated the interaction between nations due to the proliferation of products that had no boundaries and therefore commercialized worldwide. Positive things came from this exchange, but also ominous aspects such as the immigration of people from the countryside to the cities due to the industrialization, because the intermediary and the large scale of production are the principal beneficiary, leaving a large part of the productive population in conditions of poverty. That is why it's important to speak of globalization well applied, since this concept encompasses a humanistic sense of observing development under minimal conditions for all the inhabitants of the earth, and not only for those who are capable of producing large-scale goods, and it also includes those that produces raw material that are scarce and are not found everywhere. Vaccination against the pandemic is the best opportunity to bring people close together, not regardless of race and social economic status, since acting with solidarity is how the disease can be brought down. In the case of Mexico, extraordinary donations of vaccine doses have been received from President Joe Biden to ensure that the millions of daily crossing between the two countries are safe. In the same way, the government of Mexico has given part of its vaccine to Central America and Caribbean countries that do not have this access. This exercise is what truly fosters universal integration and generates what academics call globalization well applied. We are all equally responsible for this earth, our habitat from north and south and east to west. Thank you. Wish you good.
Thank you so much, Judge. Your insight, you're very, very informative. Let me learn a lot about America and Latin America. Thank you very much. Thanks again. Now the turn is Dr. Lin Chi Jia would like to give some remarks. Dr. Lin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure today to have this opportunity to give a short talk. My talk will be the impact of COVID-19 on the economy of Taiwan. COVID-19 has continued to spread all over the world. The total amount of cases of the world has reached 194 million, with more than 4 million people died by the end of July 2021. The coronavirus pandemic threw the global economy into crisis and caused almost all advanced economies fall into recession. To maintain the nation's economy, lots of countries have embarked on investing large amount of money and physical expenditure. Yet, the unlimited use of quantitative easing might lead to the risk of inflation. What is even worse, some countries may have serious financial deficit problems. COVID vaccination is underway across the world. Beginning of this year, vaccinations have begun in the US first. It is foreseeable that the US and the global economy might recover owing to the positive externality of vaccine injection this year. Other developed countries, such as the UK and EU, have vaccinated quickly too. However, ironically, Taiwan, as a country that once had successfully handled the coronavirus outbreak, is now suffering from the second severe pandemic outbreak since mid of May and facing the problem of lack of vaccines. Last year, the prosperous export of Taiwan made a great contribution to Taiwan's real GDP growth rate at 3.11%, mainly contributed by the electric and electronic industry, or we call EE industry. Accordingly, it is expected that the economic growth rate of Taiwan will reach 5.46% this year, contributed by the exporting sector again. In May this year, however, the COVID-19 pandemic suddenly broke out in Taiwan, and the epidemic warning has been lifted to level 3 just in a few days. The restriction dealt a heavy blow to the service industry in our country. The overall impact of epidemic still depends upon when the pandemic can be fully controlled. Even worse, Taiwan has faced serious shortage of vaccines and is still now waiting for her own vaccines, which apparently is far behind schedule. As a consequence of slow progress of vaccination, the influence of epidemic is likely to last longer in Taiwan. Taiwan's economy is now leading to polarization. On the one hand, the export of the manufacturing industry is smooth, driving economic growth of Taiwan in a positive way. On the other hand, the domestic service industry has been seriously affected by the pandemic, with a serious unemployment rate. Getting more vaccine, reducing unemployment, and expanding the bailout are now the most crucial policy that should be done by our government. Now I'd like to speak a few words on the COVID-19 and the economy of the world. According to IMF, the prediction shows that the global economic growth rate this year will be 5.5%, compared with negative 3.5% last year. There is a significant upturn global economy. Similarly, the economic growth rate of the US, China, and the EU should be a big rebound. It projects that the economic growth rate of China, US, and Euro areas in 2020 are 2.3%, 3.4%, and minus 7.2% respectively. However, for this year, the IMF forecasts that the economic growth rate of the above three countries will reach 8.1%, 5.1%, and 4.2% respectively. Some developing countries, most in Asia, South America, and Africa, have seen delay in vaccine due to certain reasons, such as slow progress in vaccine program and other political issues. As a result, these obstacles might slow the economic recoveries for those developing countries. As reported by IHS Markit, there will be an upturn in global export too, from the export growth rate minus 9.0% last year to positive 8.3% this year. And for advanced economy, the data shows that the export growth rate would improve from minus 10.1% to positive 9.5% this year. So the large increase in global trade might greatly help small open economies, a country like Taiwan. While the economy of the world is recovering quickly this year, there are some potential problems that need to be watched carefully. First, to deal with severe recession, lots of countries have increased huge amount of government spending, trying to bail out the economy and to help their people. And it turns out that the ratio of accumulated government debt to GDP quickly increased to a dangerous level. The US is a typical case. In May last year, President Trump spent $1.5 trillion trying to bail out the US economy. After that, President Biden spent another $1.9 trillion for a similar reason as soon as he became the new president of the United States beginning of this year. Moreover, President Biden has issued an American job plan which will cost $2.25 trillion, mainly to improve infrastructures in the United States. At the same time, President Biden has also planned to issue an American Family Plan, which will spend another $1.75 trillion, mainly to help American families, such as taking care of their children and so on. As the United States government keeps increasing huge expenditure, its deficit is also increasing. In the beginning of March this year, the total accumulated government debt of the US has reached $28 trillion, which is about 129.7% of total GDP of the United States. There is no doubt that the huge government debt could cause a serious problem in the future. The second serious potential problem for the US is from the potential inflation. In order to bail out the US economy last year, the Federal Reserve Bank issued a policy, namely the Unlimited Quantity Ease policy, we call it QE. Under this policy, Federal Reserve Bank keeps buying private bonds without limit, and it turns out that the total money supply, M1, increased by 327.2% in May last year. Professor Milton Friedman once said that all inflation are a monetary phenomenon, which means that the inflation rate and the growth rate of money supply is positively correlated. So it suggests that the inflation is inevitable when the Federal Reserve Bank pumps in so much money in such a short period of time. In fact, the consumer price index has reached 4.99% in May this year for the United States. And it is a fact that the inflation rate will reach 3% this year for the US. Furthermore, now the inflation becomes an international issue, and countries like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan all facing similar inflation problem. Now I would like to talk about the COVID-19 and the economy of Taiwan. Based on the data from Taiwan government, Taiwan's economic growth rate expect to reach 5.46% this year, which is not a bad number. And among other reasons, the strong performance of exporting sector is the main factors leading to Taiwan's economic growth. The export can be characterized in two parts in Taiwan. The one is that the export of Taiwan's EE industry have been performed well and steadily. Based on official statistics, the export of electronic products, including electronic parts and components, electric machinery product, and audio and video equipment, which accounts about over 50% of Taiwan's total export. Even during the first outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic last year, the export growth rate of EE product remained strong, with the growth rate as 17.9% last year for Taiwan. Owing to high demand of the stay-at-home economy under COVID-19, the EE industry has built a strong export all over the world last year. However, the other part of export in Taiwan, mainly a traditional industry such as steel, petrochemical, and textile, etc., had been suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic, with a negative export growth rate as negative 8.4% last year. The growth rate of export of Taiwan this year expect even higher than last year under the strong rebound of the global economy and total trade, both for the EE industry and for traditional industry. According to our government's statistic, the export growth rate of Taiwan has grown substantially first half of this year and expect to reach 15.4% for the entire year. And it is the driving force for Taiwan's economic growth this year. According to our government data, the export share to mainland China accounted for about 40% of our total export. The high proportion of export from Taiwan to China implies that Taiwan's economy is highly dependent upon bilateral trade across the Taiwan Strait. On account of the interdependent relationship of EE industry between Taiwan and China, the increasing demand of the global EE product caused Taiwan's export of electronic components to the mainland China to be boosted too. Consequently, it raised the total demand for the bilateral trade across the Taiwan Strait. Furthermore, it's foreseeable that the growth rate of consumption expenditure in GDP could reach 2.75% this year in Taiwan, which could further promote economic development growth if Taiwan could properly control the epidemic situation. Unfortunately, after the outbreak of pandemic in mid of May, it follows a serious economic recession in Taiwan, mainly on decline of domestic consumption. This caused a serious impact on Taiwan's economy. According to the estimation of National Development Council, that Taiwan's GDP will drop by 0.19% if the epidemic ends at the end of June. Furthermore, if the epidemic will not be controlled until the end of September, the growth rate of GDP could decrease by another 0.5%. However, the outbreak in May forced the Taiwan government to raise the epidemic warning to level 3 immediately. And compared to April and May situation last year, this time the pandemic is much more serious than last year. The unemployment rate now has increased from 3.68% to 4.11% from April to May this year, and then jumped to 4.8% on June, which is the highest unemployment rate in Taiwan after the financial tsunami in 2009. More seriously, there are more than 980,000 underemployed workers in June, which is much more higher than 190,000 in April. By our estimation, if the level 3 warning continues till the end of September, Taiwan's GDP growth rate might drop by another 0.5% to 1%. For the future, no one knows when the COVID-19 pandemic will be ended. Some countries now have a high coverage ratio of vaccination, such as United States and other developed countries. In contrary, some developing countries are still processing vaccines or are trapped in medical resources shortage. Although some countries have begun the injection of vaccine, the progress of vaccination shot is not as quick as we expected. So based on the current situation, it is still far from global immunization. Comparing to developing countries, developed countries that have received vaccination earlier will likely rebound first. Taiwan's foreign sector have benefited from the improvement of the global economy and expected to be in a good financial shape this year. However, on the contrary, the domestic COVID-19 condition is still unable to be effectively controlled and is resulting in a serious impact on domestic demand, especially on the service sector. On that account, to effectively solve the current condition and to open up domestic market as soon as possible, quick and comprehensive vaccination is the top priority for our government. During the past few weeks, Taiwan has speeded up vaccination for her people, but the coverage ratio is still only at 25.7% as of mid-July, and much lower than other advanced countries. Before vaccination reaches a higher meaningful ratio, a massive bailout in the short term is a necessary evil. So far, Taiwan government has launched 4 rounds of bailout, of which a budget of $30 billion is spent just for the last round alone. In the future, after the epidemic is totally controlled, how to further stimulate the economy will be another crucial issue for our government to take into consideration. This concludes my talk. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It's really the insight. I agree. I will say that it's very with depth analysis. And yes, besides the impact of pandemic, there are more than a potential problem like recession, inflation. Thank you very much. And now is Mr. Hafans.
Thank you.
Jeffrey.
It has been several years since I've had the pleasure of addressing the World League for Freedom and Democracy, so it is a delight to see old friends, even if only virtually during this era of COVID-19, as well as to meet new friends assembled here to share their insights and perspectives on the important and timely topic that you have asked us to consider. While in previous years I had addressed WLFD in my capacity as UN representative of Civicus, I'm here today to share my perspective as senior advisor to the Coalition for the UN We Need. C4UN is a civil society-led campaign dedicated to transforming the UN system by promoting inclusive, people-centered multilateralism in partnership with civil society, governments, and the UN. Previously known as the UN 2020 campaign, C4UN began in 2017 at a time when nationalism was on the rise and multilateralism was increasingly called into question by powerful governments. When COVID-19 was suddenly unleashed upon the world with all its ferocity last year, our campaign urging member states to use the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the UN in 2020 as an opportunity to take stock and strengthen the organization and international cooperation more broadly took on fresh urgency. In the past, systemic crises have led to major moments of multilateral innovation. The United Nations and the International Monetary Fund were created in the wake of World War II. What would become the G7 was created after the 1973 oil shock, and the G20 came into being after the Asian financial crisis in 1999. The coronavirus represents a major perturbation to the complex human systems of global governance. The health and humanitarian crisis induced by the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a global economic crisis. Inequalities within and between countries have been exposed and magnified, while powerful forces are already at play to use the crisis to further consolidate the already skewed concentration of economic and political power in fewer hands. While the United States, China, Russia, and the EU pay lip service in support of the UN Secretary General's urgent call for vaccine equity as a global public good, the supply of COVID-19 vaccines to the developing world is billions of doses short of what is needed. So far, vaccine nationalism, vaccine diplomacy, and vaccine profiteering trumps vaccine equity. The COVID-19 pandemic represents a new kind of crisis, one that involves the behaviors and beliefs of billions of people, that has public health, economic, political, social, psychological, and cultural dimensions. The contrast with the 2008 financial crisis and subsequent economic crash could not be more stark. Then, governments vastly upgraded the G20. Last year, with Saudi Arabia and the United States chairing the G20 and G7 respectively, neither forum produced the global action plan required. In the multilateral arena, the valiant efforts of the Secretary General and WHO in establishing the COVAX facility as a primary means to ensure universal access to treatments and diagnostics was stymied last year by the Trump administration's active hostility to global systems and its escalating rivalry with mainland China, and now by the EU's opposition to the COVID-19 intellectual property waiver at the WTO. Despite these tensions, last September, world leaders adopted the UN 75 Declaration, a document that had been negotiated virtually over the previous months during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Member states promised to fulfill 12 key commitments across the global agenda, mandating the Secretary General to report by September this year with recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. Member states recognized that global challenges such as the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, and deepening inequalities are interconnected and can only be addressed through a reinvigorated multilateralism, with the UN at its center, not as an option, but as a necessity. The 75th anniversary of the UN in 2020 took place against the backdrop of continued democratic decline and increasing great power rivalry between mainland China and the United States over global leadership. 2020 was the 15th consecutive year in which democracy declined across the world, according to the advocacy group Freedom House, with nearly 75% of the world's population living in a country that experienced democratic decline last year. During 2020, the Civicus Monitor documented a wide range of restrictions on fundamental freedoms introduced by governments under the pretext of protecting people's health and lives, including restrictive legislation to silence dissent and access to information, censorship, detention, and attacks on journalists. The Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, to be released this September, is expected to lay out the existential challenges confronting humanity, together with a set of key recommendations to resuscitate multilateralism as the world begins to emerge fitfully from the COVID-19 pandemic. Antonio Guterres was elected to a second term as Secretary General in June. He has repeatedly emphasized the need for a new global deal, a UN 2.0, and a more networked multilateralism in which, quote, the UN, family, international financial institutions, regional organizations, trading blocs, and others work together more closely and more effectively, close quote. He has also called for an inclusive multilateralism that draws on civil society, business, local and regional authorities, and others that shares power more broadly and fairly. As input into the Secretary General's report, C4UN convened a virtual global town hall in June, which considered alternative institutional policy and normative recommendations for taking forward the UN 75 declaration adopted last September. Inspired by the findings of a 6-part post-UN 75 expert roundtable series, as well as 5 C4UN regional online consultations that also took place in June. On economic trade at the C4UN regional consultations, civil society advocates from the Asia-Pacific region urged that the UN should play a central role in reforming global financial governance in the fields of taxation, illicit financial flows, external debts, and official development assistance to address issues of global economic inequality at the nexus of trade, investment, and finance. Advocates called for a UN conference on financing for development, a summit in 2022 or 2023 to reshape the global financial and economic architecture. African civil society partners highlighted the negative impact of corruption on democratic governance and rule of law, perpetrated by multinationals and corrupt politicians, particularly as it relates to unfair tax systems imposed on domestic constituencies due to illicit tax transfers and tax havens, resulting in a general lack of trust and accountability on the part of governments and multinationals. And Latin American partners noted that increasing economic inequalities in the region greatly damage the prospects for sustainable development and directly impact the lives and freedoms of many people. Moreover, the violence committed against environmental activists and the depredation of fragile ecosystems represent some of the biggest challenges in the region. Civil society partners from North America and Europe demanded that their governments move towards a more inclusive globalization by adjusting the multilateral system, international trade and finance included, as founders of the system now in place. Building on the momentum generated in 2020 by the UN 75 Declaration, it is critical that the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report this September sustains the the spirit for change by calling for a comprehensive, multilateral, and multi-stakeholder negotiation for more inclusive, networked, and effective global governance, leading to a proposed World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance. By creatively mobilizing diverse actors worldwide, the summit and the preparations for it could look to equip our common institutions with the tools, structures, and connectivity needed, both to rebuild institutional trust and competence, and to face with greater confidence humanity's perilous next quarter century. In October, we will be hosting our second annual C4UN's People's Forum. In 2020, we adopted the UN 75 People's Declaration and Plan for Global Action. At this year's forum, we will have an opportunity to consider civil society responses to the outcomes of the Secretary General's report and related follow-up to the UN 75 commitments made last year. We will further interrogate the proposition that a World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance would be an appropriate vehicle to mobilize diverse actors worldwide to upgrade and equip the global governance system to better address major issues confronting the international community, and to usher in a new global compact with citizens to enhance and rebuild confidence in their multilateral institutions. By drawing on the talents of governments and peoples around the world, this idea of a World Summit we propose would be an opportunity to overhaul the global governance system and usher in a new collaborative compact with institutions, polities, and people. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my views at this important gathering.
Jeffrey, thank you to share your insight and perspective on this topic with us. Thank you. Now we'll turn to Mr. Bonzado. Are you there? Oh, you're online now. Please, Mr. Go on, please. Say a few words right now. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Can
you see me?
Yeah, very clear picture. Beautiful picture.
Very well. Very well. So, President Yao, Vice President Sen, Secretary General Liu, distinguished fellow panelists, dear friends, all anew. Greetings from Tokyo. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, we are living in times of uncertainties and consequences. Consequences, especially on globalization, both as a process and a phenomenon binding together the dwellers of this planet. Therefore, tonight, we are here to explore possibilities. In that regard, I would like to offer 5 alternative scenarios depicting what the outcome could be for globalization due to the transformational and transformative action of the COVID-19 pandemics. So if I may share my screen with you. Very well. It's been disabled, unfortunately, see?
But it seems to me that it's all right. The audio and video both works very good.
Yeah, but I would like to share a presentation if possible.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please.
I'm trying to upload it. Anyway, while the technical issue is being solved, I will briefly introduce the 5 alternative scenarios before going to examine each of them more in detail. The first scenario is one on responsible globalization. And the outcome will be that of an interconnected world where valuing society, sustainable development, and protection of human life will be the shared principles of a global community. As the panelists who has preceded said, this is a scenario of inclusive multilateralism. Scenario number 2, chaotic globalization, a world in which inequalities increase significantly and tumultuous interconnections, political opportunism, and growing rivalry undermine global collaboration. Scenario number 3, a world of walls, a fractured world in which there is an upsurge in nationalist values, conflict grows substantially, and international institutions lose their legitimacy. Scenario number 4, a scenario of cold peace that will see a highly polarized world splintered into 2 opposing blocs, each politically stable and economically growing, but in that world, global collaborative efforts will collapse and trade networks will be disrupted. Finally, a 5th scenario, a scenario of adapted mosaic, in which the world will become global. Global, yes, but with a strong local and localistic character. A world that will be focused on sustainability, in which countries would collaborate across borders, but at the same time, they will emphasize their own resilience, self-sufficiency, and reduce their dependence on global markets and global supply chains. Now I'll try to share it again, but I think it's not possible, so I'll try to do it this way. Okay. Yeah, no problem. I can read from the presentation. So this set of scenarios depicts alternative versions of the world's socioeconomic prospects after the current global crisis. Considering those scenarios may assist decision makers with testing and measuring the outcomes and effectiveness of their recovery plans against various features of a range of plausible futures. These assessments may enable policymakers to adjust or make soundly structured policy, preparing societies for a world that will be radically changed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So now I proceed with examining a little bit more in detail the 5 scenarios. In the first scenario, that of responsible globalization, the global community succeeds in controlling the spread of COVID-19 through improving international collaboration and better coordinating efforts to implement containment measures and advancing epidemiological research and fair access to vaccine. In other words, this scenario will see a just and human-centric transition that will become the core value of economic recovery plans, especially in the light of the growing inequalities highlighted by the crisis. Governments will be capable of deploying social protection measures to support the unemployed and to coordinately and timely relax restrictive measures, allowing citizens to go back to work rather swiftly. As a result, there will be little social unrest and disorder, and the political stability will allow governments to focus on economic recovery. So this scenario will have the following outcomes. A more collaborative global community will emerge, which will be less polarized and with more general trust in international institutions. Collective global efforts toward reducing inequalities and socioeconomic gaps between countries will favor the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, in keeping with the 2030 agenda, governments will be prioritizing climate targets and environmental issues. And finally, international institutions together with national governments will start rethinking and reconsidering globalization in order to check its negative effects. Scenario number 2, chaotic globalization. This is quite a dystopian scenario in which the persistence of the disease will arise also, if not mainly, for an internationally uncoordinated immediate response. Opportunistic values and growing economic competition will lead nations to follow divergent policies. And inconsistent policies and uncoordinated measures will result in the failure to control the spread of COVID-19, creating disharmony and mistrust in the global community. So the world will remain connected, but the connections will be dysfunctional and disorderly. Global collaboration will be a fragile shell, and international institutions will lose their relevance and legitimacy. Structural employment will prevail. Government will fail to provide vulnerable groups with social protection. Thus, social inequalities will increase. The fragile state of collaboration, unstable partnership, and disrupt supply chains will destabilize trade networks and contribute to trade conflicts. The outcomes will be that of a fragile state of collaboration, unstable partnership, and disrupt supply chains that will destabilize the global economy, and chronic economic and financial problems, as well as mistrust in international institutions, will drive nations to deprioritize environmental commitment, including the one to the Paris Agreement and national climate targets. Third, war of worlds. In this scenario, the world moves into long-lasting economic downturn, and governments will fail to control new strains of COVID-19. As the global community fractures, countries will revert to isolationism and antagonistic interactions. In this divided world, countries increasingly seek to protect themselves by rising wall, whether physical, political, or legal. Nations, of course, will lose trust in international institutions and their objectivity, and those institutions will lose legitimacy and the capacity to coordinate collective dialogues. There will also be an upsurge in what we can call nationalist or traditional values, with countries increasingly embracing nationalism and voting in nationalist governments. In these scenarios, the outcomes will be a long-term economic recession that will take several years to recover. Governments that wouldn't be able to address massive unemployment and persistent poverty with a slowing economic growth. Global trade networks will be disrupted, hitting import and export dependent countries the hardest and substantially shrinking their economies. Lack of local resources and declining financial support to less developed countries will cause the gap between rich and poor globally to widen even more. Commitments to mitigate climate change wouldn't be the priority of governments that wouldn't be investing few resources into systemic adaptation and resilience building. Fourth, cold peace. In this scenario, vaccine rivalry and vaccine diplomacy, especially between Bloc A, the US and Europe, and Bloc B, will create an increasing polarization, cascading to other areas, weakening international collaboration and negotiations, and disrupting global trade networks. The world will be splintered into two regional blocs, keeping peace, but refusing to collaborate, except in the narrowest of circumstances. Over time, both blocs will undermine the mandated operations of international institutions by questioning their objectivity and threatening to suspend funds and pulling out of international agreements altogether. The outcomes will be a long-term recession and government implementing short-term measures and punitive fiscal policies without being able to effectively address massive unemployment and persistent poverty. National governments will remain within a bloc to support the economic recovery efforts and get access to regional market protected by high tariffs. Economic power will be split somewhat equally between the two blocs, so that the long-lasting polarizations will be maintained. Production nexus will be largely confined within each bloc. The economies within each bloc will start rebounding, but inequalities would increase within countries and blocs as economic growth and exchange value guide societies rather than ideas about sustainable development and protection of human life. Progress on achieving climate targets will grind to a standstill. Finally, scenario number 5, adaptive mosaic. Since the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the risks and pitfalls of unrestrained globalization, a set of tailor-made policies and measures specific to different countries and contexts will be implemented. The global community will be evaluating the impacts of global production and trade networks. Individual countries will act to improve resource efficiency and make better use of national and local assets. The outcomes will be that the world will fit together like a puzzle, rather than like in an harmonious continuum. And with national governments turning their attention to localized sustainability, economic development, and local production networks to build resilience to risks posed by global interconnections. In some parts of the world, neighboring countries will form small-scale regional alliances. International institutions will continue to function, but just as facilitators of international relations and global collaboration platforms for humanitarian and environmental dialogues. And to conclude my presentation, I would like to emphasize and explain how this set of scenarios, alternative scenarios, can be used. This set of scenarios should be considered a tool, both for strategic planning and decision-making. Policymakers at global, regional, and local scales can use those scenarios to assess the viability and the advisability of their current policies in alternative hypothetical future socioeconomic contexts. Based on that assessment, they may choose to modify and enhance their policies to make a positive outcome more likely. Thank you kindly for your attention.
Thank you very much. This is a well-written paper. We thanks a lot. And I've be frank with you, I learned a lot. The model of 5 crises is really interesting. Thank you. Now, Mr. Philip, that's you. Are you there? Oh yeah, yeah. Please, you're on.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Yes. Okay. Good morning. WLFD President Yao Yinqi, WLFD ROC Taiwan Chapter President Zheng Yongquan, honorable panelists and esteemed guests, I am grateful for the invitation and honor to speak during this WLFD 2021 video forum. The world has changed a lot in 2021 compared to 2020, which was the year of full-blown COVID-19 pandemics in the 4 corners of the globe. Although it is somehow a little bit too early to rejoice using the words post-COVID, we could witness some deep and lasting change in the economic, social, and political picture in many countries. I shall try to point out some of these huge shifts in condensed form in 4 key points. Key point number 1, work from home was and is the new normal, and this shift in working habits could become permanent in the future for a large segment of working age population. This immediate consequence of the pandemics will have far-reaching impact. Subtitle A, the need for commercial office could be drastically reduced. B, workers tending to move to suburban regions due to the desire for bigger living space instead of preference for convenience and entertainment in downtown core. C, work from home create huge needs for internet communication. Therefore, this amplified exponentially the importance of a few companies. Example, Zoom, Netflix, Facebook, as well as the 5G networking sector, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Cisco, Oracle. This new reality is also a strong boost for some unconventional marketing companies who rely entirely on the internet for their astronomical sales power, such as Amazon, Alibaba, or eBay. This completely new environment is a very powerful stimulus for the whole high-tech sector, as it helps make these tech corporations insanely rich due to the extremely sky-high valuation and market cap for their stock value. The 2020 lockdowns in all major urban centers of many countries had drastically cut down the service sector. This was a terrible blow for the majority of small and medium enterprise, as well as destroy millions of low-paying, unskilled jobs in all downtown core areas, while the more skilled ones, such as management, engineers, computer specialists, were hardly affected. This had created a huge gap between the poor and the rich class and was the principal reason for social and political upheaval in many countries, particularly in the United States, where we saw surprising results in the final outcome and the aftermath of the 2020 November election. This widening gap in wealth will be an ongoing future crisis, and we haven't seen the possibly cataclysmic consequence yet for the time being. Key point number 2, the 2020 November US election gave the presidency to President Biden. This has already given us a very different economic, financial, and new environmental picture, pointing to very obvious different direction than Trump policies. Subtitle A, to counteract the large-scale unemployment caused by 2020 COVID pandemic in American large urban areas, President Biden immediately launched his first key legislation, the $1.9 trillion economic stimulus. Then he accelerated the US speed of vaccination in order to reach herd immunity as quickly as possible, adding the Federal Reserve sorry, Secretary General. Adding the Federal Reserve QE, extremely low interest and loose money printing, all kicking into high gear. And we see a very rapid rebound in the economy. US consumers flush with cash from the government started to open up their wallets and indulge in delayed spending. President Biden's new policy on climate change and his subsequent request for another huge spending bill on infrastructure as well as future investment into EV will substantially boost US deficit and US debt into the sky. Subtitle B, as many countries are slowly coming out from the post-COVID lockdown and with unemployment slowly improving, economic activities in the developed countries are heating up, thus creating higher and stronger demand for all goods and material. This imbalance in supply-demand is putting lots of pressure on world trade and prices of mining materials, as well as other commodities, such as natural gas, oil, and especially on copper and steel. The first, because of expected future stronger demand for EV and electrification to fight climate change. The higher demand for steel is a result of stronger economic recovery in the United States and China. Unexpected and sudden economic recovery due to stronger consumer spending in the two biggest economies give rise to trading route bottlenecks at major container ports and shipping lanes, thus drastically increase shipping costs, which are circulated back into higher consumer prices. Key point number 3, all this confluence of economic awakening plus excessive easy monetary policies and disrupted supply chain as a result of 2020-2021 COVID pandemic, as well as growing debt and government astronomical deficit is slowly waking up the inflation beast. Paper money debasing, plus rising business costs and supply-demand imbalance will result in price increases. This coming inflation will push the US Federal Reserve and other central banks into slowing down their QE and will pressure them into tapering mode by the end of 2021, probably. Possible rise in interest rate will come later, maybe in the end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. This future monetary tightening could trigger lots of market disturbances and may create big market movement and fluctuation. Key point number 4, post-COVID era will possibly exhibit many unsolvable challenges and difficulties because of wider gap between rich and poor, as well as a very divided world. We will be shocked to realize that richer countries could give the COVID vaccine for all the citizens, thus quickening the pace of recovery, while poorer countries will still be submerged under the COVID-19 pandemic because of the inadequacy of their healthcare system and the acute lack of financial resources to purchase enough vaccine for the billions of people living in those poor regions. This imbalance and inequality will slow down global coverage of the COVID vaccine and will give rise to more and more deadly variants, which could invalidate and erode the effectiveness of any vaccine. This could be a long, drawn-out battle with the COVID-19 virus, and we shall see a new normal in all parts of the world. As a conclusion, I would like to say that it is too early to use the words post-COVID-19 because it isn't over yet, but we could already feel the painful impact of this pandemic on all countries, rich or poor. Globalization is also seen in very unfriendly and frustrated angle by millions of dissatisfied Americans or Canadians. People want another vision of their future. We could also hear lots of voices claiming for the creation and the rebuilding of a new world order. With so much dissatisfaction among millions of people, It breeds disenchantment and loss of confidence in the old system of trading and conventional industrial policies. Freedom and democracy would be weakened and could come under attack. But this continuing deficit and money printing could not be sustained. Automation and artificial intelligence will further destroy jobs and employment. COVID-19 is but a wake-up call for all leaders to come up with new economic ideas. Besides, let's not forget that a common and united effort is required to build a more healthy and safe world. We cannot talk about freedom and democracy if we do not have a fair and equitable world order. We need an all-inclusive WHO, and a fair United Nations. There is no worse example than the exclusion of Taiwan from the WHO and the United Nations. These two world organizations should include Taiwan as a member of our global village. Let's keep in mind that Taiwan is a perfectly functioning democratic country. The 23 millions of Taiwanese are peace-loving and law-abiding citizens of the world. They deeply love freedom and democracy, as well as fully appreciate the importance of the Bretton Woods world order. Denying Taiwan's entry into the United Nations and the WHO is the greatest injustice to all these Taiwanese. Thank you very much and wish all of you success, prosperity, excellent health. Let's pray that our planet should be peaceful, and let's pray that we shall survive this pandemic and we shall survive from our own folly. Thank you and have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. And your suggestion and analysis is really informative. And now time passed by so quickly. Our online video forum is going to an end. I believe all of us feel how amazing this modern technologies can connect us together from different parts of the world and make this forum possible as we face to the COVID-19 pandemic. Honestly, I learned a lot from your broad and candid discussion and believe only close international cooperation will overcome the problem. Thanks again for your time and your participation. Wish you good health and every success. Thank you so much, all the panelists, and your support. Peace. Yeah, me.
Thank you.
我们给他拜拜一下，再见，拜拜。
So, thank you so
Thank
much.
you, thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
在台湾见。
Good to see you.
台湾见，台湾见。
Thank you, thank you.
Hope to see you in Taipei soon.
See you in Taipei.
Welcome, welcome.
Good luck to all of you.
All right.
Thank you. Cesar. Que bueno verte. Bruce, I'm so happy to see you here, Bruce.
It's good to see you too. Thank you.
Lindo verlos a todos.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.